Stephen Bassett is the leading advocate for ending the 65-year-old government-imposed truth embargo regarding the extraterrestrial presence and engaging the human race. He is a political activist, lobbyist, commentator, and executive director of the Paradigm Research Group and the Extraterrestrial Phenomenon Political Action Committee, X-PPAC. The executive director of the Paradigm Research Group and the Extraterrestrial Phenomenon Political Action Committee and executive producer of the X Conference, his work has been covered extensively by national and international media. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome back on the Jackal's Head tonight, Mr. Stephen Bassett. That's right, everybody. Mr. Stephen Bassett is now live with me on Inside the Jackal's Head, and it's been quite a while. Stephen, welcome back, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Angel. It's always good to be with you, man.
You know, you're one of the my favorite people to talk to, especially in ufology, and I've told you this many times. It's been a long time since we talked, and a lot's happened, and a lot's not happened. You know, we went through December 21st. We're good. Nothing happened. We're here. What's the latest, that you've got going in your world, and what are you working on now that we're, past December 21st and that craze that we can look forward to for the new year and possibly get a disclosure going?
I'm sure there's a lot of people out there disappointed that the world didn't end.
Yeah.
And so now they're stuck with having to fix it. So let's talk about that. There's some extraordinary things happening, Angel. Here's what I really want your listeners to find out about tonight. In September of 2011, PRG got a petition into the White House on their website, the White House website, calling for disclosure. Disclosure petition 1, we talked about it before.
Right.
And there was a response back from the White House that came on November the 4th, which was the first time in history that the White House has ever put a position on this issue in writing. And that position was there's no evidence of any life outside the planet or engaging the human race or any credible information that the government is hiding anything. This is an extraordinary statement, completely false, and notable because it's one thing to have said, well, the presence of extraterrestrials hasn't been proven yet, or it hasn't been proven that the government is hiding anything. It's quite another to say there is no evidence at all for this, and that's exactly what they said.
Right.
November the 4th. And if your listeners go to whitehouse.gov and go to We the People, which is that petition project, they can find a response and the original petition submitted on September the 22nd, 2011. So that was a milestone. Since then, 4 more disclosure petitions were submitted, and they did not get a White House response because the threshold for signatures was raised from 5,000 to 25,000. But they did spend at least 30 days on the White House website raising various aspects of the evidence that the White House says doesn't exist. All well and good. So that happens November the 4th, 2011, which is approximately 13 months ago. Now, here's what's going to happen next. And this is all tied together. PRG, Paradigm Research Group, will launch its most important project to date next year. The event will take place in April, May of 2013. And I'm referring to the citizen hearing on disclosure. There is an announcement up on the web at citizenhearing.org, citizenhearing.net, info, com, whatever. We got them all. And that's singular, citizen hearing. And anyone can visit that. That will also be where the full website will go up approximately the 14th of January. Now, what's so important about this? What's so important is that this project is the largest advocacy project to date, engaging the truth embargo and trying to end it.
Essentially, as I mentioned, this is I think the largest advocacy project yet, attacking the truth embargo, try to get the formal disclosure of the ET presence finally acknowledged by the U.S. government. What we're going to do is this, and this is all fully funded in advance. On April 29 to May 3, we are going to configure the main ballroom of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., at 14th and F Streets. It's about 2 blocks from the White House, about 8 blocks from the Capitol. to look as much like a Senate hearing room as possible. We'll have committee tables, we'll have testimony tables, we'll have press section, we'll have an audience section for about 300. And we're going to hold a citizen hearing on disclosure. And over those 5 days, at least 40 witnesses from around the world are going to testify to a committee made up of 5 former members of the United States Congress. Hopefully the goal is 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and a centrist independent. Probably 2 women, 3 men, and the person who served the longest in the Congress will be chair, and they will conduct themselves exactly as they would have in the hearings that they sat in when they were serving as members of Congress. The motto, not surprisingly, of this hearing, the citizen hearing on disclosure, is if the Congress will not do its job, the people will. And so for 5 days, there's going to be 30 hours of testimony and Q&A regarding this issue from some of the top researchers in the world, as well as some of the most significant witnesses from government agency background of rank and station. Now, we know that there have been press conferences in the past where witnesses have spoken to the press. There have been a number of them. Almost all the important ones were at the National Press Club. I've held about 5. I have colleagues that have held. The most significant one, I think the largest one, was the May 9th, 2001 press conference by the Disclosure Project, which is now, amazingly enough, 12 years old, almost approaching 12 years old. But they lasted for a day, or actually a couple of hours, and they were over. This is going to last for 5 days, and there's going to be 40 witnesses. And they will be submitting written remarks, of course, extended written remarks, and then they will, of course, give a 8 to 10 minute statement, and then they will take questions. And we will cover the most significant areas, significant issues, some of the most important cases, and a lot of exopolitics. This event is going to be live streamed worldwide. And I'm looking into the full capabilities of that. I already know quite a bit about it, but if I'm correct in what I know about the live stream capabilities now, we hope to have 3 streams going out, possibly 4, meaning 1 in English, 1 in Spanish, 1 in Arabic, and 1 in Chinese, so that virtually anyone in the world, that's most of the world's population, can watch this hearing live over those 5 days. Furthermore, this project is being put on in partnership with a production studio from Los Angeles. And a film crew is going to be there and film everything in high definition 3D, 2D, both 2D and 3D, because there's a growing 3D market.
Right, yeah.
And so a documentary is going to be built on this, around this hearing. It will be more than just hearing, but the hearing will kind of be the centerpiece of this documentary. The witnesses are really the focus. And this documentary, it will be theatrical length, theatrical quality, and we hope to distribute it to the theaters in the fall of 2013. That is the event is taking place, and the focus, and it's going to be. We have a top public relations person that's going to do the publicity on this. That's going to start around January 14, 13, 12, somewhere in there. And it's going to go on for 4 months. And the 2 key things that are going to be constantly put into the media, or put out there for the public and the media's, how would you say, awareness, is 1, this concept that if the government won't do its job, the people will. But even more importantly, the dichotomy between the evidence that's going to pour forward during that hearing on those 5 days versus the White House's official statement, and it's still the same White House because President Obama won re-election,
right?
That there's no evidence at all for any life outside the universe. And for those outside the planet, or for the government is withholding anything. And of course, that evidence is simply going to be everywhere over those 5 days. This is the kind of dynamic, the kind of contrast that we haven't really been able to create in a way that would achieve critical mass.
Now, Stephen, what kind of evidence are we talking about here that we're going to see at this event? Like, what is some of the substantial evidence that we could look forward to seeing?
Well, interestingly enough, a lot of this is been done before. In other words, many of these witnesses have already appeared in press conferences of the National Press Club regarding nuclear tampering, regarding some of the key cases like Bentwaters, regarding Roswell, regarding documents, regarding events and evidence that people of rank and station have encountered while serving. There, in other words, there's not, at least at this point, there's not some super profound new piece of information.
Okay.
That's not needed. I mean, there's enough evidence to prove the ET presence many times over. The problem is we cannot get the media to the point where they realize, wait a minute, this is true, this is a huge story, and we should be all over this.
Right. Well, to be fair, there's enough evidence to prove that something has been going on and that something is being covered up by the government. I mean, that's really where the evidence kind of stands. A lot of the evidence is stories and stuff that there really doesn't have any physical proof. That's the only issue that I think a lot of people still have with these kind of conventions, though, Stephen.
I have to disagree with you there. There is an enormous amount of physical evidence as well as first-hand testimony.
Okay.
Not confirming that something is going on, but there's extraterrestrials engaging us. This evidence includes thousands of pilot sightings, many of which refer to discs from 40 to hundreds of feet, flying in parallel with airplanes out the cockpit window. That's serious evidence.
Well,
it includes thousands of trace cases.
That's not real evidence, though. That's stories from people who are witnesses to an event that could not be really verified. And there's a difference between evidence and a story of an event.
Angel, I gotta again disagree with you, my friend. Evidence like that can get you convicted of murder. In other words, if 5 people testify at a trial that they saw you kill somebody, there's a good chance you're going to jail for the rest of your life. Evidence isn't just some physical stuff. Evidence includes testimony, documents, even forensic theories.
But it still doesn't prove. I mean, for example, David Koresh had a lot of people that believed that he was the second coming of God, but it didn't really prove that he was the second coming of God. Or the folks who killed themselves over Hale-Bopp's comet, years ago. The Heaven's Gate movement, for example, they all thought they really were going to end up in a comet. None of that happened, but they all believed it. Doesn't again? It goes back to the argument: the absence of evidence is always, kind of the issue with a lot of the stories within ufology. And, moving forward, I think, that's one of the most important things we have to tackle, Stephen, within the UFO community, is to actually get to the actual hard evidence, if there is any.
Angel, let me be really clear here, okay? I appreciate your opinion, but I disagree intensely.
Oh, no,
there is a massive amount of evidence. So when you say that, I simply can't let it stand. You simply can't dismiss thousands of pilot sightings of that kind of clarity. You can't dismiss photographs and videos and radar logs and multiple sightings where you have people in the air, on the ground, and radar contact, tracking of craft doing 10, 15,000 miles. You can't dismiss the testimony of people with national security clearances with the rank of colonel and general and admiral of events that clearly can only be explained through extraterrestrial.
Well, see, that's different. That's different.
Well,
now we're talking about evidence. Now we're talking about radar evidence, hard evidence. I'm not just, a guy who gets up on stage says, well, when I was a kid, I saw a UFO. No, that's what I'm talking about, Stephen, the hard evidence. So we're going to get to bear witness to people speak about those kind of things.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in other words, again, this idea that there's like smoking guns and hard evidence. Look,
there's no
evidence takes many forms,
right?
And in order to come to conclusions about things, one has to take into account all of the evidence. You just don't say, well, you can only use this kind of evidence. It would be like going into a trial and saying, here's the deal. You say I killed somebody. All right, fine. But the only evidence we can have would be like fingerprints or something. You can't have any videos of me doing it. That could be fake. You can't have any testimony from people that saw me do it. No. You don't determine what the evidence is. You look at all that's there. Some evidence may be of a physical nature, where you have a piece of something. Some may be physical results, like trace cases where craft have been seen landing and then there's marks that have been left. There's been thousands of those. Some evidence may come in the form of first-hand testimony. Now, there's a big difference between first-hand testimony from, say, a person with schizophrenia who's walking the street in rags and the captain of an airplane, right, with 30 years service.
That I can definitely agree with 100%. But
well, we have those kinds of evidences, and they will be present in the hearing. Yes.
Unfortunately, Stephen, and this is something that I've talked about on the show, extensively over the last few years. Unfortunately, in ufology and in this community, it's hard to find those real, hard cases because of the clutter. And you and I have talked about this before. The clutter of the hoaxers that populate the UFO community, and that's really, I think, what we need to moving forward after 2012. I think that's where we really need to address is a lot of people that are creating hoaxes just to make a buck, just to create their own movement, and kind of putting those aside and getting to the real evidence.
Sure. I really don't really much care about them.
Right.
There are people that do lots of things like that, don't really care. When you have a trial, right, on a significant case, whether it's criminal case or whether it's a very significant political or financial case. What you do, if you want to win your case, you have to bring the best evidence into that courtroom. And in fact, there are lots of rules that eliminate a lot of things that are clearly not evidentiary, and you can't even bring those in. So what you end up when you have a trial is you put the best materials forward to prove your case, and that's happening on both sides of the particular issue. It's the same thing with this. You create forums where you can bring the best evidence forward. And the fact that there's other nonsense out there is irrelevant. What's irrelevant, what is relevant, is what is being presented at that particular time. There will be no hoaxers in the citizen hearing. There's going to be people with high rank and station, top researchers, the best evidence, the best we have, being presented and being questioned by former members of Congress. And that's powerful, and that's how you move this forward.
Right.
The fact that there's other crazy things going on, what can I say? That's their business. It's not mine, and it's not my job to account for it. Or
you can never stop the crazies.
Yeah, you can't. And it's not so much a matter of crazies. It's a matter of the fact it's an incredibly complex issue that's not been resolved. The government's interfered with the process of research and examination deliberately. It's suppressed information, withheld information. So it's deliberately created what I like to call an intellectual ghetto. And that is actually the government's fault. Our job is to cut through that. And the way you do that is you simply don't buy into the truth embargo's little games.
Right.
You don't accept the ridicule curtain. You don't waste time trying to apologize for or account for the behavior of everyone. You simply move forward focused on the fundamental goal, which is there's an ET presence, the government knows it, the government has chosen to withhold it. We want that truth embargo to end. So the citizen hearing on disclosure, I believe if it goes the way it should, the way it's been planned, has the potential to end the truth embargo next year. And the reason why is that the press, which has been pounded on this issue for decades now, more intensely than ever since 1992, with the evidence accumulating, the books coming out, the international activities, the release of files, more sightings, documentary upon documentary, publicizing some of the best cases, witnesses being put into documentaries, as well as the press conferences and on and on. This has gone on. The press has been covering this issue in greater numbers than ever. As you know, on my website, I have something like 6,500, almost 7,000 articles from mainstream media over the last, since 1947, but 4,000 of those are in the last 4 years. But they haven't gone far enough. They haven't crossed the line. They haven't said, gee, if this is true, and it would appear to be true, this is the biggest story of all time, why aren't we in a full-fledged feeding frenzy about it?
Right.
Well, that is the result of the truth embargo. That is the result of the status that the government created by enormous effort and expenditure since the 1940s to keep this contained. They did a very good job, and the media went along with it and sort of got into a certain mode about this issue. It's very similar to the mode that the media was in for many decades in the 20th century regarding presidents. In other words, there were certain things you just didn't cover regarding presidents. And the most famous example of this is the behavior of Jack Kennedy. It's now well known that Jack was a philanderer, and he had many mistresses. He even brought women to the White House, and they had affairs in the White House swimming pool with the Secret Service standing outside the door. The press knew this, but the understanding was you don't cover that.
Right.
It's not pertinent to, I guess, the job of the president. It's a personal thing. It's not the public's business. And many would argue that's a mistake and that they should have covered that greatly. Now we know they cover it greatly, very greatly.
Oh, yeah, that doesn't get away with today's society. If there's a president doing what Kennedy did nowadays, it'll be not only tabloid fodder, but it'll be on headline news, CNN, NBC. It'll be all over the place. It's ridiculous. Exactly,
and of course Clinton is the perfect example of that.
Oh yeah.
Clinton did not want his behavior to be public. And he came out and denied it flatly, and the press knew he was lying, and the press hates that. But when the blue dress turned up, the press went into full-fledged feeding frenzy.
Yeah, they did.
And I can assure you that Bill Clinton put the entire 3rd Army Corps around the White House. They would have gotten to him, they would have gotten this out, and he would have been impeached. There's no power on earth that can stop the media, modern media, when they go into that mode. They have not done that with this issue yet. But just as they had a certain understanding with respect to presidential behavior, particularly personal behavior, at one time that is gone, I'm suggesting that there has been an understanding about the ET issue, which is thousands of times more important than the sexual proclivities of the president. And that's about to change. And it's going to happen, and I think the congressional hearing on disclosure has the potential to trigger that switch. So the focus for PRG's work the next 6 months is all about that citizen hearing. And so everything is being thrown at it. The Facts on Washington, 1 Million Facts on Washington, which is another project of PRG. FactsOnWashington.org is now focused on the Office of Science and Technology Policy. We're directing faxes, letters, and emails there. Why? Because it was the OSCP that wrote the response for the president to the disclosure petition stating that there was no evidence. So we're now focusing on that. The World Disclosure Day. I was recently in Brazil, and I spoke at the 4th UFO Forum down there in Iguazu Falls, which is in central South America at the border between, I think, Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. There's about 500 people there. And what I did was I made the suggestion that Brazil might lead a coalition of South American countries to come together. Obviously, it would have to be in discrete meetings, and make a decision to go ahead and come together and disclose ET presence next year. And I suggested they consider World Disclosure Day, July the 8th, which is 9 weeks after the end of the citizen hearing. And I'm going to be putting that out there quite a bit over the next few months, that there are a dozen nations or more that could end this truth embargo tomorrow if they wanted to. And they need to think about it and possibly consider targeting July the 8th. So we're going to use World Disclosure Day to kind of focus attention on it. And any other project that we cook up. Oh, and of course the disclosure petition project, which is underway. The 6th disclosure petition will go out in about 6 or 7 days, 8 days. And this one will be, not surprisingly, we'll read, we petition the Obama administration to require that representatives from the Office of Science and Technology Policy attend the citizen hearing on disclosure in April-May of 2013. And in a write-up underneath that, basically we're saying that they need to do that because they're going to hear and see a great deal of evidence, which they have stated 14 months ago, doesn't exist. So that's a good reason why they ought to be there. Now, this petition will be up for 30 days, probably into early February. So these kinds of things are going to be going on, focusing on this hearing and this summer, coming summer. And the idea is
this is going to be a big year then for you.
Well, it's not a big year for me. I mean, the point is that
for the topic in general, yeah, but
this truth embargo is going to end, and it's inevitable. Our biggest concern is that there could be another war. There's always another war around the corner. I mean, that's just the way it is. Or a terrorist attack, a nuclear event, pick something. I mean, it's the old paradigm thinking. If it moves, kill it, and if it doesn't, blow it up. But what's important now is that, if one of these events had taken place before we could have launched this, before we could have gotten it funded, it might have interrupted the process. Very much like the 9/11 events of 2001, pretty much flattened the disclosure movement for a good while. Just pushed it completely off the radar of the media and made it almost impossible to really make much advancement. We're worried about that, but what's happened, of course, is that this hearing is funded and the documentary is funded, and so that's done and it's set and it's going to happen. So even if there's an invasion of Iran or a nuclear event takes place or something, this event's going to take place anyway, and we may overcome the distraction of one of these kind of destructive geopolitical events. So we're kind of set now. The die has been cast. And this time, the funding is there to do it right. So the result is that the citizen hearing is going to be magnitudes greater in scope and impact than any advocacy event prior. And it may reach what we call critical mass. And that's a simple concept for most people know what that means. If you put enough nuclear material in the same place, eventually you get a chain reaction. Right?
Right.
And if you don't have enough, like if it's scattered around, you get nothing but just some radioactivity, but right. no reaction, no event. This is enough stuff in one place, I think, that we may be able to create a chain reaction within the media and set them off. I mean, that's the way to look at it. Meanwhile, we're going to be pushing it out elsewhere, particularly overseas. So there's going to be pressure coming in from a lot of directions. So this is what's coming up. This is what's in play. And there's many other things that could happen. I expect more sightings, more witnesses to come forward, more movie stars to come forward and say, look, I've been dealing with extraterrestrials since I was 5 years old. All that's happening. There's going to be more of that in 2013. I expect more countries to start releasing files. All right, we've got about 13 now. There'll probably be a few more.
Yeah,
so
I definitely see that happening more and more in the next year. Stephen, let me stop you there real quick. We do have a caller who just called in, who wanted to join us and ask a question. We have California guy on the line.
Hey, what's
Stephen
going on,
Bassett.
Jack?
How you doing, California guy? What's up, buddy?
Not much.
You're on the line with the great Stephen Bassett of the PRG. Do you want to Paradigm Research Group? You want to talk to him about UFOs? Do you have any questions for him?
Yeah, I do. I got a question. How accurate is the Drake equation? Because I watched it on TV the other day. I think I watched a documentary, and I wanted to know how accurate. Okay. It's way off?
Go ahead. Ask your question.
It's a cool question. Great question.
Yeah, how accurate is the Drake equation, and does it mean like intelligent life with ships or just regular like organisms and different things like that? And I have another question too. I know it's kind of two-parter. I watched Stephen Hawking last year, and he said that like aliens, if mankind discovered aliens, that they would be hostile and they would treat us like, insignificant beings or like animals or something like that.
Yeah, I've had my issues with that statement of Mr. Hawkins myself, Stephen. You want to address that?
Let me respond to both these questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Drake equation was pretty cool. Frank Drake, an astronomer, came up with it decades ago, back in the days of Hynek and the early days of Carl Sagan. And it's a fairly rough equation in which they took all of the variables that he felt was relevant to the possibility or likelihood of intelligent life existing on the planet. And then it tried to assign values to those variables, right, as well as certain constants, to come up with a probability that there is life on another planet besides Earth. And they came up with a pretty low probability, not surprisingly, and that was it well served the truth embargo, which was well underway by then. I don't know if Dr. Drake was in any way deliberately servicing the truth embargo, but it was handy for them to have this equation coming up with such a low number. What's happened over the decades, of course, is that the assignment of the variables, as new information has come in, have gotten more and more favorable to the probability of life outside the planet Earth every passing year, until recently when it exploded. One of the most key variables in the Drake equation is the number of planets in the galaxy that would be in a zone around a star where their size and the temperature zone was conducive to life and to water. There was a time when that was considered to be a very small number. As of recently, it's now in the billions of planets. And so you don't hear so much about the Drake equation anymore because, frankly, if you run the numbers, and some scientists have, and you actually can find some of these accounts, some write-ups about this, basically they're saying that the probability of life outside the universe is essentially 100%. So is the Drake equation accurate? Well, if you put the variables in and you use the information that is now most current and you don't bias it towards the truth embargo, it basically gives a 100% certainty there's life outside the planet. Now, with respect to Hawking, that was amusing. What Stephen Hawking did was rather clever, and he's not the only one doing this. There's a lot of this going on. I call it positioning. This is where individuals and institutions are doing things to improve their position with respect to this issue. All right? It's kind of like the king is very sick, and the king is going to die pretty soon, and you sort of know who is going to be the new king. And so even though the current king is still alive, you're going to a lot of effort to try to ingratiate yourself to the king to be. All right, positioning yourself, how would you say, in a auspicious way with respect to the next king of the realm. This is what's been going on. The Catholic Church has done it quite well. But the Catholic Church is not alone. Hawking, what he did was two things. He made a statement where essentially he acknowledged that there was extraterrestrial life out there. And then he made a statement, well, yeah, but we ought to be careful because it could be a problem for us. Now, what's important about what Hawking did is the first statement. Hawking acknowledged there's extraterrestrial life out there. He just positioned himself on the right side of the issue. But he doesn't want to suddenly be looked at as some sort of, quote, UFO believer. And so then you come in with, yeah, but we probably should be careful about approaching it or looking for them because they could be harmful to us, like the situation that you found with South America and the invasion of the Spanish and all of this. Well, let me tell you, Hawking is a pretty smart guy, and he's well aware that the second part of the statement is just a load of nonsense. Right? It's childish talk. It's not sophisticated. It's ludicrous in a way. One could have discussions about that, but when you're a genius like Hawking, you go a little deeper than, well, we ought to be careful, they could harm us. So what he was doing was, the second part of that statement was to sort of take the edge off the first part, so nobody was suddenly, he was suddenly getting phone calls from everybody around the world saying, you think there's ET life here? What do you think about the Bentwaters case? What do you think about Roswell? He didn't want any of that. He doesn't want to be associated with it, but he wants to be positioned well.
Right.
And so he can always say, hey, I told you. I always said there was extraterrestrial life. Now the government's admitted, yeah, it's been engaging us for 60 years. Well, I didn't know a lot about that, but I'm not a troglodyte here. I'm not a closed-minded man. And there's a lot of this going on. You're seeing it all over the place. You're seeing witnesses coming forward. A lot of them are coming forward because they want to get this information out ahead of time, right? Which makes sense. Not after the fact. you have the CIA just made an interesting limited hangout with a former, one of their senior covert agents named Chase Brandon, who in retirement came forward and said, "Yeah, Roswell's real. I always knew that." That's called a limited hangout. The CIA is positioning itself. So you're seeing this kind of stuff take place, and that's what happened with Stephen Hawking. So I'm glad you're paying attention to both of those things. Stephen Hawking is right. There is an extraterrestrial presence here, but it's not out there. It's already here, and whatever its intent is, well, I think the sooner we find out, or all of us learn, the better. And the Drake equation, if you solve it now with the proper information, it gives you a 100% probability, certainty of ET life.
And again, he could be absolutely right about there being extraterrestrial life out there that is hostile. I mean, there's no proof one way or the other they're not, or they are. That's the crazy thing. But he could be right. There could be hostile life out there, Stephen. It's a very good possibility there is both good and bad aliens out there.
But
our friend UFO Phil thinks there's good and bad aliens. Why not? It makes perfect sense.
But Angel, you have to understand, Stephen Hawking is genius and a well-connected man.
Oh, no, of course, yeah.
Okay, he has enormous contact. Let me finish. He has enormous contacts within the scientific community and probably also within the military communities as well. Stephen Hawking is absolutely aware of the ET presence and probably has been for decades. So when you hear a comment from him like that, you need to put it in that context.
Right. You need to read between the lines. I completely understand. I completely understand what you're saying, but in many ways, even reading between the lines, there is a very strong possibility that there might be some hostile aliens out there, and that might be part of the reason why it's been kept under disclosure or under wraps, and we haven't had disclosure because of that.
Yeah, that's what I would want if I was 7 billion human beings. I would want the government not to tell us about the possibility of hostile extraterrestrials. So when they finally arrive, we would be completely taken by surprise. Yeah, that's definitely what I would want. Now that's not. He's not even being serious there. If he wants
it does kind of sound like something. It does sound like it sounds like something we would do, though. Let's be honest. As a government, we won't tell you nothing.
It's what a man has to do when he's not prepared to violate the truth embargo. And the list of people that will not violate the truth embargo that know what's going on is an extremely long list.
Right.
And the only reason one of the reasons the government's gotten away with the truth embargo is that a whole bunch of very smart people of influence, people of power, have said, I know the ETs are here, but I'm not gonna challenge that. I'm gonna let the government tell us when they tell us. All right? And that's fine. I mean, that's their choice. But if society was to always have to wait, right, for people like that to come around, we wouldn't have made any advancements in the last 1,000 years. Right? To get along, go along, so I don't want to rock the boaters. Usually they're that way because they're pretty comfortable. They have a good life. They have money. They have no problems, and they don't really much care about the problems of anybody else. And so, they don't want change, and they don't want to challenge the state.
Right,
but unfortunately,
they want that status quo.
They want the status quo because their status is pretty good. And so the rest, those who are concerned about the status quo, those who are very concerned about the nature of governance, the nature of society, you have to move past them. And you also have to lose a little respect for them. I mean, I honor the fact that they're doing what they think is right, but I don't particularly respect that approach. I lose some respect for them, particularly when they open their mouth. In other words, if they keep quiet, meaning, look, I'm not going to challenge the state, I'm not going to say anything about it at all. I mean, the government will do what it's going to do, and I'll just go about my business. But when they come forward into the media and make statements about ETs, or the possibility of ETs, or the UFO issue, or cases, or anything else, whether that's a Carl Sagan, or a Seth Shostak, or Phil Tarter, Dr., what was it, the bad astronomer Phil Plait, any of those people, and they open their mouths, then that's a different ballgame. And then you can't let it go.
I have one more question to ask, too. I have one more before, I was talking to Jacko a couple months ago, and I did a show on my own radio show about Nazi UFOs, and one of my guests mentioned about a particular woman who was in a cult, who disappeared, and there's no record of her, that was born in the early 20th century. I can't think of her name, but she was supposed to be in a cult, and she was a Nazi, and they said that the Nazis, toward the end of World War II, disappeared into the veil, and he disappeared off of Earth. And she was on Wikipedia, because I seen her on Wikipedia like a month ago, and now they took her profile off of Wikipedia.
It's got to be real then. It's on Wikipedia. But I've never heard of that woman. Have you heard of such story, Stephen?
Look, there is a great deal of lore out there with respect to Nazis and ET-type craft.
Right.
I believe there's some truth in it. In other words, the Nazis have created one of the great 20th century mythologies. I mean, we just can't get over them. I mean, they live on because we're just intrigued and incredibly engaged by Nazis and what they did. It's possible that a crash vehicle came into the possession of pre-World War II Germany, which would have created quite a stir. Again, we had that happen at Roswell in 1947, so could it have happened in the 1930s? Yeah, could very well. That would have certainly gotten the Germans looking really hard. Plus, I think these things were seen. I think there were sightings. I know there were sightings prior to the war, weren't as publicized as much. And when smart people see something like that in the sky, their first question is, how the hell does it work? And I think that the Nazis may very well have looked really hard at it because of the potential for it to impact their war desires. Exactly how far they went is not clear. Were they able to create workable craft? Don't know. But is it likely that what they did do has been significantly embellished and enhanced to create a kind of mythology? Absolutely. I'm not surprised at that. It also happens to serve the truth embargo, so the government has a vested interest in encouraging that mythology, meaning, no, there's not ETs up there. These are Nazis. They created saucers. They got bases in Antarctica. They're flying all over the place, but it's not ET. So don't worry. Don't worry about those craft. They're not ETs. They're in fact Nazis. So you have nothing to worry about. Whatever. This serves the truth embargo. It's wonderful disinformation. Someday, I think, perhaps post-disclosure, we may come to learn much more of the hard facts about what the Nazis knew and what they did. Right now, it's much too mythological to be of much value, in my opinion, to the disclosure process underway right now.
There you go.
Yeah, because they showed it on Ancient Aliens, and I can't think of her name right now, but they said that, I can't think of the group, but they were like, they was into some sort of a cult. I kind of agree, it might be mythological, but they were saying that the woman, she was on record, and she supposedly existed or don't exist, and then they said that her and the Nazis left. Yeah, because it was mentioned, because I've seen it on Wikipedia. I even looked it up, and if she was in a group, and they said that her and the other Nazi scientists, they just completely vanished, and you never could find them.
Well, speaking of Nazi scientists, of course, the United States, Stephen, they did bring over Werner von Braun and a lot of Nazi scientists over to the United States, and they integrated them with our programs out here. In fact, you could pretty much say that rocket science was not only greatly helped by Werner von Braun, but he's the guy that got us to the moon. In many ways, I mean, we can make that argument.
It gets so complicated. By the way, the Nazis, a lot of the Nazis were into cultism, and there was a number of societies, the most famous being the Thrill Society. And he's reading about some of that. And again, that happened. There was a Vril Society. They did have women who were channelers and so forth. They were into psychic stuff. All true. But a lot has been added to that. So the actual full truth of all this is not well known. Now, in terms of the Operation Paperclip, that's pretty cool, because essentially the dynamic that could very well have been in place there was this. If the Nazis got their hands on an ET craft, like we did at Roswell in 1947, when technology was a little bit more advanced, all right, say if the Nazis got a hold of their, in say 1930 or 1928 or whatever, obviously the technology was not as advanced as it was in 1947. They would have tried to work with it, they would have tried to study it, reverse engineer, whatever, and they would have learned some things. Now, what they could do with that tech and how far they go would have been limited by the technological sophistication they had, as well as the problem of running two major wars at the same time, both the Eastern and Western Front. So they were kind of preoccupied. So they learned what they did. When they lose the war, and we bring these scientists over, we brought hundreds of scientists, and the Soviet Union got hundreds as well. And they were probably the most valuable prize of the war, frankly, not land, but those scientists. They would have come to us not only with their rocket technology, which they were ahead of the U.S. without question, but they might have also come with some knowledge gained from attempting to reverse engineer craft, which we may have not had in our possession. That there's some speculation we might have had a craft as well prior to World War II. But if we hadn't, for instance, if our vehicle wasn't going to arrive until 1947, then those scientists would have been very useful. But then when Roswell takes place, and that craft turns up, well, we've not only got our own scientists to dress it, but we've got the paperclip scientists. So you could see how a reverse engineering of the Roswell vehicle and a study of that technology would have gone into hyperdrive and moved very quickly, given the confluence of the event, the timing, and of course the paperclip scientist, because it did move very quickly. And I believe that we had our own working anti-gravitic propulsion, possibly as early as the very early 1960s. And I think we've been improving on it ever since, possibly including the triangles. So this is real stuff and heavy stuff. But when you get back to the paperclip level and you get back to what the Nazis knew during the war, before the war, now we're into some pretty sketchy areas, which unfortunately really excite people and have generated a great deal of mythology. And that's why the whole Nazi saucer thing really doesn't impact or have much value to the modern advocacy process for disclosure.
Now, I don't know if we've talked about it before, Stephen, on the show, but I've always been kind of mixed about Roswell. I know something definitely happened at Roswell, but I've kind of over the years, not so much bought into the theory, but I've actually started to, believe that this could be a possibility to explain what happened at Roswell. And there's a theory floating around that what really happened at Roswell was not a crash of an extraterrestrial UFO, but a Nazi-built UFO and flown by our own scientists, which we inherited from Nazi Germany, and this was the craft they were working on, and we made it fly. And like most things that we first put in the air, they're going to come down as test flights go. Not every test flight is perfect. You're going to break a few before you get to actually perfect flight on anything or any vehicle. There's going to be mistakes. So that's kind of like the thing going around. That's kind of what happened, but it doesn't eliminate the extraterrestrial connection because it's still going to be extraterrestrial technology.
I gotta respond to that. Look, there's a lot of theories going around, and the probability of those theories being true is probably 1 in 50,000 or 100,000 or a million. They're theories of almost no value at all, but they're entertaining.
That's a really interesting theory, though. If we
there's a lot of it. I could make up a theory right now. I could make one right now. It sounds pretty exotic, but it would be totally bogus. The fact is, the evidence is for an extraterrestrial craft, not some. It wasn't filled with mutant teenagers created by Professor Mengele or built by the Soviets or fungal balloons for Japan. The fact is there's an extraterrestrial crash that occurred there. We have hundreds of witnesses that have been interviewed. We have a lot of work that's been done. So if you read Friedman, you read Randall, you read Berlitz, but probably most importantly, I would say you read Schmidt. And his co-author, and forgive me, the name is blanked out to me, and I apologize to him, but the Witness to Roswell, incredibly powerful book. Now, let me also mention that a number of my colleagues have been told it's true by people in government, including me. I've had a person from Army intelligence tell me flat out to my face that Roswell was a craft, but other AT craft. The point is the evidence is overwhelming that Roswell was an alien craft. And all these other theories, I think in many cases, are conveniently introduced by government in order to just continue to muddle the whole thing up. So to me, the crash test dummy mogul balloon explanation given by the Air Force is much disinformation as the theory that was tossed into play by Ms. Jacobson in her book, Area 51, about Mengele and Stalin and whatever. It's all nonsense.
Right.
But it serves the same purpose, which is to divert the media from getting it, right, from getting what's going on here. But the work has been done with great difficulty, with very little money, confirming that Roswell was an ET craft. And one day these people are going to get their just desserts for that and get the respect that is due them. But as long as the truth embargo reigns, they have to wait. But they did their job, and they've proven that Roswell's an ET event. All I can say is, if someone has any doubts, read the books. Read about 5 or 6 good ones, but make sure you read Witness to Roswell.
Yeah, you can definitely start there. You know, there's a lot of interesting books that definitely point out. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of information that points to an extraterrestrial connection. Now, you know, let's look at the Obama administration for a second, Stephen. Do you do you really believe that Obama is disinterested in the subject? Because he's always seemed kind of lukewarm to the entire subject. To him. I mean, do you really think he is deep down?
I mean, I don't think he's. It's not a question whether he's interested or not interested. I don't know. I imagine he's probably not particularly interested in the Arab world, but he's hip deep in the Arab world. When you're president, it's not about what you're interested in. It's about what is important to the national security and to your job of serving the people of the United States. And I can make a very good case that the presence of extraterrestrials is a fairly important matter that should be addressed by the President of the United States. Now, that said, Obama's election in 2012 was probably the most significant disclosure event of this year.
Interesting.
And the reason is this. Bill Clinton was supposed to be the disclosure president. It was all there for him to do. The Cold War was over. It had already been over a couple of years, roughly, by the time he takes office in January of 1993. But more importantly, Lawrence Rockefeller, the humanitarian environmentalist Rockefeller, who was very much interested in paranormal, approached him about releasing all the UFO files and made a 3-year effort to convince Clinton to make a dramatic move here. Now, had that developed, had Clinton responded in full force to it, he could have been the disclosure president. But there were powerful forces arrayed against that possibility. And it didn't happen. But a lot of people knew about this initiative by Rockefeller and were involved in it. And it turns out that those people turn up in the Obama administration approximately 14 years later. So Bill Clinton is not the disclosure president, but then George Bush becomes president for 8 years, and there was very little likely that Bush was going to be the disclosure president. Plus you had 9/11, the Iraq War, the Afghan War, and so it just wasn't on the table, wasn't going to happen. Then comes the election of 2008. And when Obama wins, that's significant, because now you have a Democrat back in the office of presidency who, and I don't think this is a coincidence, has direct connections back to the Rockefeller Initiative. It could have made Clinton the disclosure president. And what are these connections? They're pretty significant connections. Bill Clinton, of course, knew about the Rockefeller Initiative. He was president, and Bill Clinton was significantly a part of that campaign. In fact, his wife was running against him, and he is a significant player in the Democratic Party and always will be until the day he dies. One of the key advisors to Clinton was John Podesta. He was fully aware of the Rockefeller Initiative, and he became Obama's transition chair and helped Obama pick his administration.
That's true, yeah.
The chief of staff to President Clinton during the Rockefeller Initiative was Leon Panetta. Obama made him the director of the CIA and eventually the Secretary of Defense. Another person that knew about it was Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton ran for president and, of course, was then made the Secretary of State. These are very significant. Oh, and then Bill Richardson knew about the Rockefeller Initiative. He's a close friend of the Clintons. And Obama attempted to make him the Secretary of Commerce. These are very powerful connections back to the Rockefeller Initiative. which opened the door for Obama to possibly be read in to this issue, given the kind of briefing that he needed to get, or some sort of deal being cut between the administration and the military intelligence complex. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks before the actual election, and about 2 months before Obama was took office, the biggest financial collapse since the Depression took place, an orchestrated collapse, let me tell you, so that the people in power at the time could essentially steal all the money they could before they left power, and trillions of dollars were shifted out of the American public's hands and into the hands of American and international bankers. The greatest heist of all time. And the result was essentially to bankrupt the United States and put it into full-fledged crisis, so that the president walks in the door on January the 20th of 2009, hip deep in emergencies. And that never stopped. And so essentially his first term became rather strange, to say the least.
Yep.
However, he just won a second term. Had Mr. Romney won, I think disclosure would have been much less likely. But with
why
Obama,
is that? Why is that though? I mean, is it a Republican-Democrat thing? Are the Democrats a little bit more open to opening up about disclosure and telling us what's going on? Or, I mean, is it a Republican thing?
To some degree it is, yes. I mean, it's not a simple answer to that question, but in general, the Republican Party is much more in sympathetic to the military intelligence complex. In other words, they're much more of a whatever you want, you get.
Right.
And they're also much more conservative about national security. And so if there are two groups within, say, the military intelligence community, one would like to have the truth come out and one would make the case for secrecy, the Republicans are going to lean toward the secrecy. And for that reason, the Republicans have really been not a player in disclosure at all. They have stayed away from it. On the other hand, the Democrats have not, and when President Clinton's key advisor, and chief of staff during his second 4 years, John Podesta, walks into the press club, not only once on September in October of 2002, but again in October of 2003, and calls for the release of all UFO files in front of cameras. That's a significant event. In fact, it's much more significant than people realize at this point. One day they will figure out how significant it was. There was no Republicans doing that. This was a Democrat doing it, and he did it for a reason, and it wasn't just because he felt like doing it. It was a strategic maneuver of some risk. And they backed, and there was other things going on. Bill Richardson came forward and put in writing his thoughts about Roswell, which were quite interesting, and that was in 2004. But when they lost the election, which they thought they were going to win, then the second time around when Kerry lost, they really backed away because they realized that this strategy might be too dangerous, too risky, and they were out of the office again for 4 more years. But then, lo and behold, when they do get back in the White House, what happens? Podesta's brought in, Panetta's brought in, Hillary Clinton's brought in, and so there are plenty of people in there that knew about the Rockefeller Initiative, that have already in some way engaged this issue, even though they're not prepared to walk in front of a camera tomorrow. In other words, their disposition toward it is much different. And so the likelihood that an Obama presidency might be the one that cuts the deal with the military intelligence complex that allows disclosure to take place is real. Obama has not been an anti-national security president by any means. The left wanted him to be, but he didn't do that. And in fact, he is. If I'm the military intelligence community, I don't have any problem with Obama. I mean, what would be their complaint?
He's really surprised a lot of people, I think, in this country with the way he's been pro-military. A lot of folks thought he was going to come in and immediately do negative, things against the military, and he really hasn't, which surprised a lot of people. But again, it goes back to, the president doesn't really control as much as we think he does. That's why it almost feels like it's a status quo type of thing. Now, if the Republicans have this much of an issue with it, Stephen, the Congress is majority Republican. That's still going to be an issue. Again, disclosure is not really... The Congress should have been holding hearings. The last hearing they held was 1968. Right.
I mean, they've held hearings on a lot of pretty silly stuff.
Right.
But they've managed to go 44 years without a hearing on this. I mean, that's a massive failure of their responsibility. But disclosure is not their job. It's the president's job. He's the commander-in-chief, and this is a national security matter. But the president's in a box. In fact, the government's in a box that they created. They've, in a way, painted themselves into a corner. And how they did this was by embargoing the issue for 6 decades now, by cutting the president out of the loop, starting probably with, increasingly pushing the president out of the picture, starting with Kennedy and Nixon and so forth, and probably giving them less and less information and driving the stuff deeper into the covert world, the black ops world. They've created a split here, right? And so the dilemma they face is that the president being out of the loop and not being briefed, and a president that doesn't know for a fact that the military intelligence complex is going to back him, is going to come forward with the information needed. For that president to go in front of the people and say, "Look, there's ETs here, but I can't tell you any more because I can't get the information from my Air Force." I mean, they can't do that. I mean, so the president, his hands are tied. Even though the president may well know there's an ET presence here, you don't have to get a frigging CIA briefing to know the ETs are here. The evidence is rather massive. It's on the internet. Just go find it. But you need more than that if you're going to make an announcement of that magnitude. Now, meanwhile, the military intelligence complex has a different problem. You see, the military intelligence complex is not another branch of government. It, in fact, is the national security structures that work for the president, who is the commander-in-chief. He is their boss. He is the boss of every single person working in the CIA, the NSA, the DIA, the Department of Defense, the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy, all of them. I don't care if they've got ultimate super classifications and they've been working underground their entire life. They work for the president. And so for somebody in that complex to say, gee, I think it's time that people know the truth about the ETs, and to come forward and hold a press conference would be high treason.
Right.
It would be the end of their career, and it wouldn't go well. And so the military intelligence complex, their hands are tied. And the truth embargo has created this situation. So now they got themselves painted in a corner, and they don't know how to get out of it. Well, there's only one way to do that. And that is somebody from the military intelligence complex who is wired in to the ET issue. He's got to meet privately with someone from the Obama administration that understands this issue. And they each come to an understanding of what the president needs, and the military intelligence complex gets a good sense of what the president, presents what they need. And the two sides essentially agree, okay, this is the way we'll go forward. This is how disclosure will take place, and we'll back you, and you're going to back us, and it's all going to be fine. And once they have that meeting, disclosure will come very quickly thereafter, because it's not something that you can leave on the burner for any length of time, because the odor will eventually fill up the entire house, and everybody will know what's going on. And so they'll move pretty quickly to do that. But until they have that meeting and reach that understanding, they're in a standoff. Well, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry they painted themselves in the corner, but that's something they did.
Well, Stephen, do you think they maybe have had that meeting already? Because, I think it was about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, I'm not sure, but Obama was, I think it was the president of Russia, and he told him after the election you'll have more time, and it was kind of vague, and it was something that was caught off camera. I don't know if you remember the audio for that. Now, I've always wondered if that had anything to do with disclosure itself.
No.
And none at all. You're thinking that?
No, it was referring to a matter in I think it was either the Middle East or possibly in Asia. But the concept is true. In other words, bringing up the ET issue probably in the last 6 months of your first term may not be politically wise.
A good idea, right?
Now, but of course, Clinton was in the same position after he got elected a second time. The Rockefeller Initiative wasn't over at that point, but you know what happened after that. I mean, after he became a lame duck president, they went after him even more. I mean, no president has been attacked more than Bill Clinton. A lot of people think Obama's been attacked more. No, he has a ways to go before he catches up with Bill Clinton.
They haven't tried to impeach him yet.
Yeah, I mean, it took him all the way to impeachment to keep this guy under control, because as it was a lame duck second-term president, Clinton could have very well decided, I'm going to be the disclosure president. Screw him.
Right, yep.
But he didn't. But he had another problem. Bill Clinton had another serious problem that prevented him from taking that kind of unilateral action, which would have made him one of the most important presidents in history. And that is, he owed a huge debt to his wife, who had aspirations to be president. And I have a feeling that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton would have been pretty upset with Bill if he decided, I'm going to be the disclosure president and maybe ruin your chances to be president. And she's got so much stuff on this man, I'm sure it would fill volumes. So he was pretty much boxed in, so he couldn't do it. Obama's not quite in that same position. He is now a second term. He's never going to probably have an office again. One of the greatest historical legacies of all time is available to him if he can solve this problem, this dilemma that they have created for themselves. He has people around him that are probably knowledgeable of the ET issue, and he's always got John Podesta. But it's still tough. And again, from the standpoint of the public's interest, I'm sorry that they've painted themselves in a corner, but disclosure needs to take place, and we're tired of waiting. And so if they're not going to do it, we'll continue to push this until it happens on its own. Either because the press is going to go into full-fledged media frenzy on this, and that's the ball game. The damn truth embargo wouldn't last, I think, 30 days, frankly. Or another nation is going to act. And we're putting stuff out to other nations all the time. Any number of nations could act. And I will say this again in your show, and I've said it many, many times. Anybody that is working in the United States government, particularly in the national security area, or working in the executive branch of the United States government, that doesn't think that a China coming forward and ending the truth embargo, or a Russia, or a Brazil, or a number of other countries won't have a dramatic impact on the United States' legacy and position in the world is a fool. And they better pinch themselves, throw some water in their face, and wake up. Because that could very well happen, and the consequences will be non-trivial. So if they feel helpless, or they feel paralyzed, or whatever they feel, I empathize with them, but the reality is what it is. That if the U.S. does not disclose soon, it is going to be second fiddle to another nation, and one of those nations could easily be Russia or China.
This could be the next big race. This could be the next big race, like the race to the moon.
It is in itself a race. I think it is. Yeah. I think it's almost getting there. And I'll be honest with you, the historical political legacy of being the first disclosure nation will be many, 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 many times more important than being the first country to put a human being on the moon.
Oh, I agree with that, definitely.
So we may still be proud of that, and I'm proud of it, but I got to tell you, compared to disclosure, it's not that big a deal.
And Stephen, let me ask you, because we're almost out of time here, and I really wanted to ask this question real quick. Disclosure, of course, comes in many different ways and forms. I believe, and I've said this on the show again in the past, and I think I've even spoken to you about this before, even on private conversations. I think I might have mentioned that to me, I think if they do disclose whatever it is they know about aliens, it's going to come in a form of microbial life at first. I don't think they're ever going to disclose. Like, you're never going to see the president saying, "All right, American people, I'm telling you right now, aliens are real, and I'm going to bring out Zaxxon from planet Zaxxon, and here he is." Like, that's never going to happen. I think they'll start slowly and gradually with, like, microbes on Mars. It'll be kind of like that. Do you think that's the way they're going to go? Because that's kind of my theory.
No, Angel, that ship sailed a long time ago. Every time I use the word disclosure, I'm using it in a very specific context. And it has a capital D. We've talked about this before. Mm-hmm. Disclosure, as it is defined within the advocacy movement, is and only is the formal acknowledgement of an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race by the heads of states of the nations of the world, starting with probably one nation first, most likely the United States. It is President Obama or Prime Minister Cameron, or the head is or the president, I forget, the chairman of the Communist Party in Tao, I think, or Putin, going in front of cameras and telling the citizens of their nation that they're not alone in the universe, that they're being engaged right now. That is disclosure. That's all it is. Small d disclosure. A little information here, a little information there, a document here. That's been going on for decades. That's fine. But that's not the disclosure I'm talking about.
No, I know. Believe me, I know exactly the disclosure you're talking about. But to me, I just can't see the government actually do. It's hard for me to fathom, really the government coming up and just admitting
they have no choice.
Lying to us.
They have no choice.
It's a tough battle, my friend, because I really have a hard time seeing them.
Well, I mean, it's a tough battle, but we're winning it, and it's been going on for 65 years. I mean, the Catholic Church was able to deny the Copernican revolution, but eventually they had to give in, didn't they?
Yeah, God bless you. You are fighting a tough fight, that's for damn sure.
No, it's getting easier all the time. You simply can't. I mean, there are things. Some things can be more contained than others. The containment of the ET reality was extremely difficult, and they spent billions of dollars on it. So, I'll give them some credit there. But again, it's still extremely difficult, and it's just the containment system is breaking down. It's just not working anymore, and they're running out of time. And while, wars and terrorist attacks and other things might help to delay it, possibly, at a huge cost, by the way. These wars are costing trillions of dollars and destroying the economies of the Western world. So if somebody says, yeah, we need more wars so we don't have to have disclosure, I'm saying, well, fine, then we'll all be living in a stone age and we still won't know about the ETs. If I was an ET, I would think we're the funniest things within the galaxy. I mean, when you look at the way humans conduct their affairs, you've got to have a sense of humor. It's hysterical, but whatever. It is what it is. The point is that disclosure is inevitable. And it can easily happen next year. Next year looks really, really good. And again, thanks to a significant contribution from a very, very advanced thinking human being, Paradigm Research Group has the money to put on the citizen hearing next year and to create a full-fledged theatrical documentary about it. And that's all going to happen. So we encourage people to learn about the citizenhearing.org, to spread the word. If they want to come. It's not a there may be a little conference attached to it, but that'll be a separate event. It'll be separate from the hearing, essentially. But the hearing itself is going to be hearing. It's going to be like a real congressional hearing, only it's the citizen hearing. And it's going to be 5 days in Washington in the spring. And we're going to put the most amount of evidence from the best witnesses that we can assemble to the world's media 4 or 5 days. And let's see what the media does with it. If they decide it's time to win some Pulitzer Prizes and ask some tough questions of people and not back away when they give you a stupid answer, the truth embargo will not make it through the summer.
Well, there you have it. Stephen, thank you so much again for being here tonight, my friend. I always love having you on and getting into these discussions with you. And all the callers that called in tonight on the show, thank you all for doing that and calling in. And Stephen, we will definitely have to have you back on next year. It is going to be an exciting year, regardless, of what happens. It is going to be an exciting year. And I'm just happy that we're going to have 2013, and the Mayans were wrong, and that we're still going to be alive. And I didn't have to be Woody Harrelson in the mountain, screaming up the top of my lungs like in the movie 2012. I didn't have to be that guy. So I'm just happy about that. So we can be happy about the small things. And Stephen, like I said many times, my friend, I wish you nothing but the best health, and I hope that you continue your battle with disclosure, and hopefully we get that day where we actually have disclosure, man. This is what we're all fighting for, believe it or not. We really are, and I'm fighting for you, man. Anything you need from me, I got your back 100%. Thank you so much.
Well, I look forward to doing the show again, maybe in February. There'll be much to talk about.
Definitely, sir. Thank you so much for being here.